Hello and welcome to Season 3, Episode 2 of Logicast, the AWS News podcast brought to you by Logicata. I'm Carl Robinson, CEO and co-founder of Logicata, and I'm joined today, as always, by my colleague, lead cloud engineer, John Goodall. How are you doing today, John?
Your intro for me is getting better and less annoying. I'm enjoying it. It's getting better.
I'm refining it as the time goes on. We've only done about 52 episodes, and I'm never quite sure how to introduce you, but I'm glad you like it. And we're also joined today by fellow AWS community builder, Jason Andrews from ARM. So thank you very much for joining us, Jason. How are you doing today?
Yeah, doing very good. Thanks for having me.
No problem at all. What listeners won't know is we've just had a whole bunch of technical issues which almost prevented us from recording this episode with Jason, but we're super happy that those technical issues have been resolved. Nothing to do with us or ARM, I should hasten to add, but we're really pleased to have you on. So Jason, tell us a little bit about yourself. Where you're from, what do you do for a living, etc.?
Yeah, sure. So yeah, I'm coming to you from Minneapolis, Minnesota. So that's where I lived, and I work for ARM remotely. Of course, visiting to Cambridge a number of times and different ARM sites. But yeah, working remote in Minnesota. I work in what we call developer ecosystem. So my role is really to go around and promote ARM for different types of compute and different types of applications. As you mentioned, I've been in the AWS community builders, I think since the start of the program. I don't know how many years ago that was, but I've been promoting Graviton and helping developers, move workloads onto the different ARM instances in AWS, and I've been promoting that for a few years now. So yeah, that's what I do. Really, just get more developers using more ARM everywhere.
Nice. So if you've been in the program from the outset, you must have experienced all of the different swag packs that they send out on each annual anniversary, have you?
Oh yeah, I got lots of swag, stickers, patches, all kinds of stuff.
Nice. Yeah, I think we're coming up to renewal time, aren't we, John? So
Feb-March time for renewal, yeah, because they've rationalised the programme now, because it used to be twice a year, and now it's just once a year, or there was one renewal a year, but 2 application cycles, and it was just a mess. Because I saw the announcement, so now it looks like they're just moving to annual for everything, which is much better. But I'm slightly scared of that because I've got to work out now what content I need to put out there, because we've made a lot, but what am I going to put out there that's like my 2 best things that's going to get me to get that renewal? Because I really want to get renewed and Carl not get renewed again, because that'd be great.
Yeah, I'm as I've mentioned on the podcast before, I am a year 1 community builder for the second time. So I've never actually made it to year 2 of the program, but this is my second year 1. So maybe Jason, if you've been in the program from the start and have been through several renewal cycles, you might be able to give us some little tips off air on how to remain in the program.
Okay, I'll do my best.
Nice. So we're not here to talk about the Community Builder program, although we are all members of it, and that is part of the reason why we're here. But as regular listeners to the podcast will know, I collate a list of AWS news articles every week in my weekly AWS News Roundup newsletter. And then John and I pick a subset of those articles that we would like to talk about in a little more detail on the Logicast podcast. So we have a selection of articles this week. And the first article is from our good friends over at InfoQ, and it is about the unveiling of the 4th generation AWS Graviton processor with the R8G EC2 instances. So, Jason, this one plays right into your field of expertise. So I'm going to come to you first and ask you your thoughts on the latest generation Graviton 4 CPUs.
It's super impressive. I mean, I watched, at reInvent the launches of Graviton 2 and Graviton 3. And, for us at ARM, that's really the most exciting thing because, these things start many years back into the past, and it goes through a long cycle of development. And then to finally kind of be there at reInvent when one of these new Graviton processors is launched, it's super exciting. I mean, this one is pretty much better all across the board. I mean, everything is better about it. The cache is bigger, the memory bandwidth is better. I mean, all the technical specs are all great. I think to me, really, the big impact of this one is about the scaling. So we've been working over the last number of years, well, probably since Graviton 2 came out, to migrate more developers onto Graviton. And you always have to go through this, little bit of a dance thinking, okay, what do I have to do to try this thing? It looks like it costs less. Is it really faster? And there's a lot of back and forth there. And essentially, the way I see it now is with Graviton 4, it kind of takes all the mystery out of the situation where you say, well, what if it's not fast enough? Or what if I need more virtual CPUs? Because, it had a limit basically in the past with Graviton 2 and even with Graviton 3. And a lot of those things are gone now. So, I feel like whatever compute you need, there's a Graviton instance that can probably do it. So you don't have to worry about once I get over there and my app is working, I have to kind of backtrack and go back to where I was. So that's really helping with the scaling.
Nice. John, thoughts on this one?
Less on the Graviton side and more on the AWS side, and I'll come to that in a minute. Not everyone probably appreciates this, though, that ARM don't actually make any of the chips. You just license designs, I think. Is that correct?
Yeah, so if you're not familiar with the ARM business model, we don't make any chips. Essentially, what we do is we provide an architecture and instruction set, and then we have partners like AWS who make the silicon. And that's the beauty of the business model is all those partners we have, they can customize, they can innovate, they can choose what's best for their applications and for their customers. And it really enables a lot of choice. I mean, that's what you get from it in the end is that, each cloud service provider and all the other markets ARM serves, those designers make different choices. It gives a lot more flexibility and access to things in the marketplace. So yeah, it's a very unique business model.
And I guess the other benefit from the business perspective is you're not having to worry about fabs and foundries and actually doing hardware stuff because hardware is difficult.
Yeah, that's true. All that stuff costs time and money for sure. But it's a close collaboration, I would say, with ARM and our silicon partners.
Yeah, I thought it was just worth just highlighting that one because you talk about chips and you think about, well, it's ARM, but is it Amazon? But is it? Well, it's both, technically.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, the ARM ecosystem has shipped so many chips. I mean, the thing that always amazes me is the 270 billion chips, and that actually came up in the Graviton 4 launch. AWS announced that they've built over 2 million Graviton chips now. It's pretty impressive.
Yeah, because up until relatively recently, I guess most ARM chips were on GPUs, graphics cards, I guess. And now it's got this big explosion in the kind of more obvious space with MacBooks and what have you having them in.
Yeah, I mean, initially the success of ARM is from the mobile industry. So, in the smartphone and all the mobile devices, that's sort of ARM's, first claim to fame, I would say. And yeah, a lot of expanding in server and cloud now, which is a great market. And then I think automotive is falling behind that. So that's the next market that has lots of activity right now.
Cool. I'm an ARM fan. I've been an ARM fan forever. I've got a Gen 1 Raspberry Pi kicking around that's so old. It's got the misprint on the board from it still says it's got a 10 meg Ethernet connection. Like, it's that old. I'm a bit of a fan. The only piece of annoyance I have from this particular article, and it's not the chips per se, it's the inconsistency of releases of the various versions between the services. And I get that to an extent, and certainly between the regions I understand that because, it's physical hardware. You've actually got to go and put it in things. But when you say it's available for EC2, cool, can I have it in a Lambda? Oh, no. That's version 2 or 3 or whatever they've managed to get up to now. That always grates a bit because if you really want the adoption, make it in the thing that costs less first. Put it in your Lambdas because they just work. And there's very, very few workloads I've found that Lambda doesn't perform better on a Graviton chip.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's just more a matter of execution and getting all the services and all the regions. And yeah, like you say, you have to build hardware and roll it out. So that's kind of how AWS chooses to do it. And that's whatever works for them.
I get it because I think what's the number? The revenue breakdown for the services, it's still like 60 or 70% from EC2. So they're going to put it in the thing that makes money first, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, exactly. You're going to follow the money, go where the money goes. I'm sure that's the main driving force behind it. And speaking of money, the article does talk a little bit about pricing. So I wanted to ask you guys your thoughts on this. Obviously, this is more of an AWS issue than an ARM issue, but it seems that the price of the Graviton chips is creeping up. Now, AWS also always go to great lengths to explain the price performance benefits of the latest version of the chips. And I think, I guess what's happening here is the performance is increasing so much that they can't keep bringing out new generations of chips and making them cheaper than the previous generations of chips. And I think that's what people have been used to seeing with AWS, that typically when a new generation instance is launched, it performs better and costs less on just a per hour basis than the previous generation. But some of these new Graviton instances are starting to actually cost more than the previous generation because the performance is so much greater. So any thoughts around that?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because, Graviton started essentially with lower performance and, everybody said, okay, that's fine. The price is lower. Now, when I meet a lot of developers, AWS has been advertising, I think, since the beginning of Graviton, 40% better price performance, right? And some is price and some is performance. Okay, so when I meet people, I would always expect them to say, the price is great, but it's a little bit slower, but that's okay for me. I'm fine with that trade-off of price and performance. But early on, even in Graviton 2, I had a lot of people saying it's cheaper and it's faster. And I said, oh, okay, maybe you're not doing anything, or maybe your workload is light, something. And I think people got used to that. And over time now, as the performance keeps going up, and you look at Graviton 4, I mean, it's competitive with any other processor that's available in terms of top-level performance. So yeah, of course, the price has to go up on that. But I think in the end, it's really having that flexibility. If you still get along great with Graviton 2, the price is still going to be very attractive. And you don't need to have the latest and greatest, SIMD instructions and those type of hardware features.
I guess as well, to an extent, people were sort of comparing in the 1 and 2 days it to an x86 processor. And now it's to itself. So it's getting more expensive than it used to be. But I think it's still cheaper than the x86 equivalent. So it just, I don't know, it's a messaging issue, I think, more than a real problem.
Yeah. I mean, AWS, obviously, they've gone down this route because of the huge cost savings, in the manufacturing and the chip development. So I'm sure they're going to continue to pass that on to the users as they have been. So not expecting that to change.
Yeah, I think that's one of AWS's core principles, isn't it? To I forget the exact wording of it now, but to continually seeking to reduce the price for the end user customer. So and they've been pretty true to that, throughout their existence. So cool. Okay, let's move on then to our second article for this week, which is a slight change of subject matter and back to our old friend Gen AI, but slightly different aspect of Gen AI this week. This is an article from the AWS DevOps blog about best practices for prompt engineering, specifically with Amazon CodeWhisperer, but of course prompt engineering applies to any kind of use of Gen AI. So I had a little read through this, and it just reminds me of putting the right search terms into Google to get the right result out, but a slightly different, slightly different angle on that. So, John, tell us a bit more about best practices for prompt engineering with Amazon CodeWhisperer.
I mean, I read this, and all I thought of was a joke that one of our previous guests, John Topper, had made about this on LinkedIn at the back of a developer advocate on DA on tour thing. It's prompt engineering is not just shouting at developers until they do what you tell them to, apparently. But yeah, I think the high line is it's absolutely the same as just knowing how to Google, really. It's knowing how to use the right words to get the right outputs. There's just, and our guest last week, Brian, kind of went on about this at great length and started talking about dolphins and all sorts, but the short version is using the right words helps. Weirdly, saying please and thank you gets you better results from a machine, but okay, fine. And there's going to be specifics for CodeWhisperer versus every other LLM out there because they've been trained on different data. And CodeWhisperer has presumably been trained primarily on Amazon data. So I suppose these tips are going to be more CodeWhisperer focused, but as you say, they're kind of generically applicable to an extent. The top line ones, though, just going to read them out real quick. Be specific and concise. Yep, everyone likes that generally, even people. So that's good. Add context. Use multiple comments because with CodeWhisperer, you don't have like a chat interface. You do it in comments in your code in your IDE. So that's also a thing. It will use comments and code to pick up more context. So if you've got multiple windows open, and this on-tour thing did show this as well, it can interrogate multiple files if they're open. So not if they're just there, sitting there, but if you've got them open in your IDE, it will show, you say, based on this file, write unit tests, give me test data, blah, 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 and it can reference other files. So you can do that as well, and that gives it more data to work with. And then it talks about cross-file context, which is what I've just said, and then prompts with cross-file context. So the short version, I think, is be prompt, be concise, and give it as much data as you possibly can from either multiple comments or asking it for one simple thing and then build on the thing and then build on the thing rather than all in one go, which the article talks about, and have as many things that are relevant to what you're asking it to do open as possible. Raspberry Pi mug. I will always spy one of them because I have one of them.
Is that the sticker or the pin?
That one is a coaster.
Oh.
Good.
I've got a load of Gen 1 merch. I told you I'm a fan. Right, back on message. But yeah, it's interesting because the LLMs that we're used to, so Amazon Q, ChatGPT, whatever Microsoft's one, no, that is ChatGPT, Google's one, Bard, I think, has a chat interface, and you're used to sort of chatting to it. But with CodeWhisperer, it's in your IDE, so you kind of interact with it a little bit differently. Yes, you say, generate me this, please, and it will kind of do that, but it's got access to a lot more context, so you work with it a bit differently. So it's definitely worth giving this a read and kind of going through it and seeing if you can make it work for you. Because I've tried a couple of times and I still struggle with it, but I don't know, maybe my prompts are just rubbish.
You need some better prompt engineering, John. This is a useful article for you. Any thoughts to add on this one, Jason?
Yeah, it's an interesting concept because so many of these, Gen AI things are coming out for developers. Some are targeting, in the IDE, like we're talking about here. Some are chat interface. I still find myself kind of jumping back to the browser. I guess it just comes from the fact that Stack Overflow is the previous way that you did this. So you got stuck, you needed some fragment of code, jump to the browser, put it in there, find the Stack Overflow and kind of work back. So I find myself naturally jumping to the chat solutions. And I also know you have to try a bunch of these, so it's kind of a trade-off. Like, you want to spend more time on the prompt engineering, or do you just want to go try 3 or 4 of them and see which one looks like it's taking you down the right path?
It's throwing things at a wall.
Yeah, that's kind of where we're at. The other thing is my VS Code now has so many of these plugins. I'm not even sure which one is generating the code from time to time. So it's a kind of Wild West at the moment. And yeah, CodeWhisperer is in there. And I try it out. And I have other ones I try too.
While we're on the subject of Gen AI, have you had any other great use cases for yourself, uses of Gen AI?
No, we're kind of looking at it a lot from a developer's perspective to see how this is going to play out. And at first it was super exciting, and now I'm kind of thinking, well, maybe it isn't, because it feels a little bit like when the Google search engine was invented, and then everybody was so impressed, and then you searched, and then it didn't answer your question. You say, oh, the search is broke. So what should I do? Well, I should build my own search engine. That's basically what's happening now in the Gen AI, is people are trying to get it to do what they want. It doesn't do it, and they say, oh, I should build my own, right? I can get an LLM, I can do RAG and this and that, and then it'll do what I want. And it's like, okay, well, that's kind of like building your own search engine if it doesn't find your stuff. So yeah, we're kind of going through those phases right now.
Bit of a hype cycle happening. Yeah, it'd be interesting to see how it all pans out. So moving on from Gen AI, the next article this week is from the AWS Cloud Operations and Migrations blog. And it's got a very long title, so let's see if I can read it without my teeth falling out. The title of this article is How to Use AWS Config Proactive Rules and AWS CloudFormation Hooks to Prevent Creation of Non-Compliant Cloud Resources. So a few things to unpack there, John. So do you want to start with some definitions?
I can do.
Into the meat of the article?
I picked this because this is something I need to do. So I thought, well, I can talk about it here, and then I can actually have properly read and understood the article because I need to do this. So it's a bit of a cheat, really. Right. So definitions. AWS Config. That is a number of things, but it looks at the entirety of your AWS account, depending on how you've configured it, maintains an inventory of everything that's there, and allows you to evaluate the state of it. Compare with a number of rules. You can write your own, you can use pre-built ones. The pre-built ones have parameters. The obvious ones are things like, are your EFS volumes encrypted, or do your EC2 instances have the right tag on them? Do they have the tag? Is it the right value? And so on and so on. That's great, but it doesn't work for preventing these things from being wrong in the first place. It just tells you when they are wrong. So you can create the instance without the tag, then the rule goes, oh, you don't have a tag, and then you have to go and fix it. So it's great for that kind of, it's a proactive rule, but okay. It's kind of this more reactive cycle. The traditional way, I suppose, of fixing that would have been to use something like a service control policy or an IAM policy that basically says you cannot create this resource, EC2 instance, unless it has a tag on it. Great, wonderful. That breaks CloudFormation because of how CloudFormation works. It will actually create the instance and then tag it afterwards. It doesn't break Terraform or the API or anything like that because it does it kind of in one hit. But CloudFormation, because of the way it works, that would break CloudFormation. That's not great. So how do you make it play nicely with CloudFormation? You use a hook. Brilliant. So you have to write some code so you can tell it to validate what it's trying to do, and then it will either pass it if it passes or stop it from deploying if it doesn't. Wonderful. And this blog tells you how to do it. Great. Next. They're really complicated, it turns out. Writing your own, they're really complicated. There's 25, 27 pre-rolled ones, mostly from the AWS samples blog. And some of them are handy, some of them are useful, like is EFS encrypted? Great, you want to check that sort of thing. But if you wanted to do, say, the tagging one, which is specifically what I want to do, you have to write it yourself. That's a bit of a faff. This article does go some way to telling you how to do that, but it's involved. It's very involved. And honestly, I wish it was a bit less involved because this is the sort of thing, in my opinion, that should be one-clickable or, it's pre-done for you. Yes, I get that every criteria in creation can't be accounted for, but why are there only like 20 of them that they've thought of? Like, I could come up with that many off the top of my head. But yeah, interesting. A couple of other interesting bits. It plays like a Lambda. It's not a Lambda, but it plays like a Lambda, and you test it using Lambda, and you package it the same way that you would with a Lambda. But it only supports Java or Python, so no TypeScript for your JavaScript pods. Sorry. Which just makes me happy.
He's still suffering from PTSD.
Yeah,
I know
Steve,
we've mentioned
Python
to TypeScript stress disorder. Yeah.
Yeah.
Which we've mentioned a couple of times on the podcast before.
Yeah. But yeah, it's interesting. These are definitely worth looking into if you have that specific requirement around, I must have something like a tag applied. And tag is the one that I use as an example because that's what I'm working on. And you can use tags for an awful lot of things like cost control and allocation or driving other services like your backups and that kind of thing. So making sure you've got something like a tag deployed to all the things you care about is incredibly useful. And I guess that's why I'm salty about it, because I figured that would be a basic one they'd have done for me, and they haven't.
Anything to add on this one, Jason?
Well, it helped me a lot get from John the reason why this thing was created. I couldn't figure out why we need these hooks and why they're there. So the context helped a lot to figure out specifics of CloudFormation, why you need this. Personally, I get an email I think every Sunday night that tells me I have some violations of the config rules that are in my account and I have to go fix them. But yeah, it's a reactive activity, and then you have to nag people to fix the stuff. So it's the more automation obviously is better.
Absolutely. Cool. Okay, let's move on to something that we regularly talk about on the podcast, which is cost reduction. So this is an article on a site called Digital Information World entitled The AWS Calculator and Other Free Tools to Reduce Your Cloud Costs. Now, obviously, the AWS Calculator is not a tool to reduce your cloud costs. It's a tool to calculate your cloud costs, but that's always a good starting point. But John, I know you had a few issues you wanted to raise with this particular article. So what are your thoughts on this?
Calling it an article is generous, I think, is my biggest problem with this. It feels like it's shilling for the cost calculator. I'm like, what is that achieving? Like, okay, fine. The tools it mentions are useful. Okay, so cost calculator, I hate it with an absolute fiery passion because it's awful. It's just awful because you've got to know so much data to get an accurate kind of measure to then get an estimate of your cost. It's almost unviable.
Well, and the only way to save a cost calculation is to copy the hyperlink and save that somewhere in a bookmark. And if you forget to do that, you lose all of the work you put in there, which is quite frustrating. So if the cost calculator developers are listening, we'd love a much better way of saving those cost calculations because it's a little bit clunky.
Yeah. The other tools are more interesting. And yes, it's a bit basic and a little bit remedial, but I like to keep bringing the basics up again and again because people, we live and breathe this every day. Not everybody does. The other ones that are useful, Cost Explorer. Cost Explorer has been getting steadily better over the past couple of years. A few years ago, it was a bit kind of, meh, I'll read the bill. And now it's actually quite useful. Especially when you tie it into things like cost and usage reports as well, and it will give you these nice graphs, and you can work out where your spend's going across multiple accounts within an organization, and export pretty graphs for management so that they can just look at a bar graph or a pie chart or whatever, and that's great. Love Cost Explorer. Use that quite a bit, to be really honest. So that's useful. Trusted Advisor. Less helpful, but worth knowing exists because Trusted Advisor doesn't just talk about cost, it talks about other things as well, but it's useful. It's worth knowing it exists. And then Budgets is not a tool per se to reduce costs. It's just, again, cost tracking, which is, I suppose, the cost calculator one. And then Compute Optimizer, which is, again, you're over-provisioned, you're under-provisioned, or all it seems to be recommending these days is you could save a load of money by using Graviton. Cool, thanks.
That's the right answer.
Jason's very happy about that recommendation.
Yeah, that's right.
It's all it says. It's all it says. It's just use Graviton. Wonderful. I'm not rebuilding my entire application on ARM. Much as I like ARM, this application is older than I am. I'm not rebuilding it.
Anything to add on the cost side of things, Jason?
No, not too much. I mean, I'm not in the trenches day to day doing cost type work like you guys are, so I'll leave it there.
Yep, no worries. Okay, let's skip on to our final article for this week then, which is about the annual Gartner Magic Quadrant for cloud services, of which, of course, AWS, among other cloud providers, are in the leaders quadrant. One thing that frustrated me about this article, and I guess it's because they don't have the reprint rights, but I don't think it actually includes the quadrant. So it talks all about the quadrant, but the quadrant is a very visual tool, and I could not find a picture of the quadrant in the article, which was quite frustrating because when you look at the quadrant, you can see how the different vendors compare to one another in their particular quadrant. And of course, you've got the I forget what the two axes are, but it's I think it's completeness of vision and ability to execute. I can't remember which way round they are, but obviously you can be in a quadrant, but you can be further along those axes than the competitors. So that's the interesting thing to look at from my perspective. But unfortunately, in this particular article, I couldn't see that.
And that makes it less useful because you look at AWS, GCP, Microsoft, and Oracle, and they're all leaders. Okay. Yeah. That doesn't tell me anything.
But they will all be in a different position in the quadrant, which is why you need to look at it. So I guess we could have found another article where we could actually see the quadrant. But usually I would expect to see AWS much further into the top right than any of the other vendors. But as we can't see it, we can't confirm that from reading this article. But what are your thoughts on the Magic Quadrants, Jason? I'm sure you've looked at these before.
Yeah, I definitely looked at them before. It's been kind of shifting over time. I mean, AWS, I think, was way out in front for quite some time. And now Microsoft is creeping up, getting closer, definitely improving. I mean, I think in this particular article, Microsoft was number one on the vision axis. So that was kind of interesting to see. Yeah, I think it's bunching up a little more than what we've seen in the past, and that's probably going to continue. And AWS will have to work hard on the differentiation to stay out front.
Yeah, I mean, we're always talking about AWS, so we're very kind of entrenched in the world of AWS and all of the new things that are coming out of AWS. But actually, if you zoom out a little bit, these new things are all coming out in Microsoft Azure as well. So the whole the Amazon Q that was launched at reInvent, Microsoft have their Copilot, I think it's called, which they're pushing very heavily now. There's a lot of similarities in the visions that these guys have, and of course Microsoft has as much of an ability to execute on these things as AWS does. So it's going to be interesting to see how this pans out over time. What about some of the other providers, though? Do you think anyone else is really in the mix in terms of the leading quadrant?
It's hard to say. I mean, generally I'm working at the compute level and in processor space, and the top four have all adopted the ARM architecture in some form as of now. So we saw AWS way out front kind of by themselves for some time, and then Microsoft had a new chip late last year. We've been working with Oracle for some time. They've adopted ARM architecture in their cloud as well, and they have a very interesting free tier for developers, which gives you a pretty good VM for free forever, they say. So okay, I'll take one of those. But all the other guys are coming up in the ARM architecture, and they all have instances available. So it's going to get more competitive, I would think.
Which can only be good for the industry, a bit of competition, because there's obviously been a lot of criticism, particularly in the UK, about the monopolistic position that
the CMA loves shouting about it and then doing nothing.
Yeah, there's been a lot of that. We've talked about it on the podcast. There's been a lot of it in the press recently, but more competition is always good for the market and for the customers. But that brings us neatly to the end of our time for this week for Season 3, Episode 2 of Logicast. So if you're still listening, thank you for listening. John, thank you as always for your insights. Jason, thank you for being patient with us through those technical issues prior to the recording. And thank you very much for joining us and giving us the insights from your perspective. If you've enjoyed the podcast, tell your friends. We are available on all major podcast distribution platforms. If you'd like to see our faces while you listen to us, we're also on YouTube and the Podbean video distribution platform. So that was all for Season 3, Episode 2 of Logicast. We'll be back next week with another guest and another episode for you. We'll see you next time. Thank you very much.